We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Yo guys! This is Uruzi and this is part 10 of What If Naruto Was the Red Flash. Naruto finds out about Uzumaki clan when he was 4 years old. Naruto swears to rebuild the home of his clan and finds all the family he has left. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 58, An Uchiha. Sasuke. The sound of the leaves moving around the branches, the wind hitting his face, was the only thing he could hear as he kept moving around the forest, Sakura unconscious on his back, his eyes searching for a place to lay low. Jumping again, his eyes saw a small opening underneath a tree. Arriving there, he looked around but couldn't see anyone there. The sound of trees were the only thing he could hear. He kneeled slightly and walked inside the opening, removing Sakura from his back. He put her body leaning against the body of the tree. Sasuke noticed she had lost all color of her face. Her legs were dripping blood. A long line of blood went from her nose to her middle body, her clothes redder from the blood. Her right leg had a bone that had come outside. Blood, dirt and mud mixed around her wound. Her whole skin around the wound had turned red and swollen. From the wound and lower, the skin was red in soaked blood, her body motionless. Her left foot was almost in the opposite direction than normal. The skin close to the heel had few splits, blood leaking out. Sasuke put his hand under her neck, closing his eyes. He felt a pulse, releasing a sigh of relief. Only now Sasuke noticed the dry blood on his hands. He breathed a huge breath. He ignored the blood. For now, Sakura needed his help. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the basics of helping an injured person. The academy had taught them a few simple things in their 5th year. Sasuke mentally cursed himself for not paying that much attention back then. He remembered calling it boring since it had nothing to do with getting stronger. Sasuke's eyes opened, remembering to add either alcohol or something hot in an open wound to stop it from getting infected. Sasuke slammed his hand in anger. He didn't have either of those things. If Naruto could be here, he would know what to do. Sasuke found himself saying and feeling angry that he was powerless in this situation. He stood up. He started pacing around. Not knowing what to do, he slammed his hand again on the side of the tree, rubbing his hair and clenching his teeth. Damn it, damn it, damn it, Sasuke almost shouted when he remembered about his weapons. His hand moved to the porch, pulling out a kunai. His eyes went to Sakura's wound. He knew that wound get infected, and that was the last thing Sakura needed. I won't let my teammates die on me, he thought and walked outside. His eyes turned to Sharingan and checked for anyone around. After a few moments not seeing any sign of enemies, he put the kunai on the ground. Kneeling close, he used as little chakra as possible. Doing hand signs, he breathed a small fire that hit the pointy end of the kunai. He kept breathing fire until he saw the metal had turned almost yellow from the heat. He grabbed a few leaves from the tree and put them around the handle to not burn his hand trying to grab it. After putting more than 20 leaves, he grabbed the handle of his kunai. He still felt his hand slightly burning, the pain growing, but he ignored it and walked inside the opening. Walking inside, Sakura still stood motionless. Sasuke felt something seeing her like this. Kneeling close to her, he put his left hand on her forehead. Thankfully she wasn't burning up since it hadn't been long since the attack. He put his hand under her neck, feeling a pulse again. Sasuke found himself smiling. Now was the worst part. Sasuke didn't try to move her leg, knowing he might injure her further. He felt his hands shaking, his heart jumping on his chest as he leaned the blade closer, knowing this would hurt more than everything else. He swallowed a huge breath, holding the handle of the kunai with both of his hands, trying to stop the shaking. I'm sorry. With that said, the blade touched the wound as Sakura's screams echoed through the forest. After a few seconds, pulling the knife away, he threw it and immediately checked her pulse. It had gone up. Closing his eyes again, he started counting, beat after beat for a whole minute. 160 heartbeats per minute, Sasuke murmured under his breath, not knowing how much that was comparing it to the average. He tried to remember how much is normal, but he didn't remember anything. Giving up, he crawled close to where her head was lying. His hand rechecked her pulse before turning to look at the only opening of the tree, the vision of the forest outside. Opening his eyes, he immediately checked around but couldn't see much. His eyes turned to look at the only light source. Walking outside, he was met by a small bright light streaming through the many trees. Is morning? Have I been sleeping? Sasuke found himself asking when everything returned on his head. He remembered Naruto telling him to leave and Sasuke immediately ran inside. Sakura, he yelled, kneeling and checking her pulse and breathing. He sighed in relief knowing she was alive, but his eyes turned to look at her wound. Her legs had turned bright red, swollen to the point they looked twice thicker than usual. The place where the injury was covered in black and red skin. The blood had dried around her legs. He put his hands on her forehead, feeling a bit warm, her face pale, small bags under her eyes, and her lips looked slightly darker. "Come on, Sakura, stay strong," Sasuke almost pleaded when he heard sounds from outside. His Sharingan immediately activated as he slowly came outside to be met with 3 shinobi. Sasuke's face turned from concern to cold like a stone in a second, his eyes glaring at the newcomers. He noticed strange things attached to the arms of 2 of them, while the girl of the group looked normal to him. Their sound handband made him wary. Naruto had told them to be mindful of any sound ninja. Sasuke hadn't even heard of any existing sound village. They were only 5 great villages, and the sound wasn't one of them as far as he knew. "Who are you?" Sasuke asked with a dark tone, chakra focused on his feet if he needed to move fast. "Who we are doesn't matter, we are here to eliminate you, Uchiha Sasuke," the guy in the front said with a hint of a sneer in his tone, pointing the finger at him. This earned a chuckle from the one to his left while the girl to his right seductively licked her lips. "Such a shame, I usually don't harm such fine meat," she said with a husky tone, showing a bit of her cleavage to Sasuke, who just narrowed his eyes further before smirking. "If you're here to kill me, you should do better than that," Sasuke stated, earning an annoying look from the girl realizing the genin wasn't falling for her looks and charms. The one in the middle said nothing but give his subordinate a glance. The third one laughed before raising his arm and aiming at Sasuke. Suddenly a blast of sound crushed against the tree. Zaka grinned, knowing he killed the Uchiha brat with a single shot before any celebration could happen. Zaka was sent flying up in the air, and he felt his whole breath escape him. He didn't have time to breathe when Sasuke showed up behind him, moving his leg hitting him square in the chest. Before rolling around, he moved his right leg trying to smash his chest when the other guy showed up, his fist raised. Sasuke put his arms in the front, blocking his attack. His fist hit his forearm, landing on the ground. Sasuke was about to move again when he felt a sudden pressure on his right ear, blood leaking, and he put his hand on his right ear. "What's this?" Sasuke asked, trying to stand up, feeling another pressure boiling up as he emptied his stomach. "You think you avoided me? I wasn't trying to hit you, my arm can send sound around the air, and with my chakra, I can direct wherever I want." Dosu spoke with a slight chuckle before rushing again. Sasuke ignored his pain and immediately jumped away towards a tree. Walking up, Dosu followed closely, ready to attack again. Sasuke stopped running and jumped down at him with the purpose to hit him, when Dosu moved his arm again, sending sound causing Sasuke to puff. A kunai with 3 papers to show up. Boom! The whole half of the tree burned. Zaku looked around when he saw the falling figure of Dosu hitting the ground. Zuko immediately started looking everywhere. The girl rushed at her teammate, thinking to heal him. She kneeled only for Dosu to transform into Sasuke, who attacked immediately. She brought her hands in front of her chest as Sasuke stabbed her leg. Zaka noticed the Uchiha very close to Kin. He smirked and immediately aimed his right arm at them, sending a blast of sound. Both Sasuke and Kin were caught off guard as the wave crashed against them, sending them both away. Sasuke put his hands around his head as pain echoed through his skull, his ears buzzing from sound as he could hear and see almost nothing, his nose and ears bleeding. Kin screamed out in agony, holding her head. Zaku ignored her cries of agony and just grinned, seeing the Uchiha was down kneeling on his legs like a dog. He started walking towards him as he put his leg on his chest, pushing against the ground, adding pressure to him and laughed and aimed his right arm. He was about to finish him off. Leaf Hurricane. Zaku screamed. A leg had hit him in the forearm, as his face was kicked, sending flying towards a rock, causing fractures around his back, his right arm broken. Zaku kept screaming, holding his right arm with his left, pain not stopping. His right arm had turned bright red around his forearm and started swelling. Sasuke slowly opened his eyes, seeing a green jumpsuit freak standing in front of him with his right arm raised. "You won't harm any of my friends," the green freak said, grinning with a slight sparkle. Sasuke forced himself to stand up, using his hands for support. "What are you doing here, jumpsuit freak?" Sasuke asked, already noticing the girl was in a terrible shape to keep fighting because of her stupid teammate, and the guy who blasted him with sound had his right arm broken. Sasuke was about to ask where the rest of his team was when Dosu rushed at them. Sasuke tried to move away, but his head felt like a hammer had just hit his face. "Jump away!" Sasuke screamed, knowing the danger, but Lee had already put his hands in front of his face to block the fist. Dosu hit his arms. Lee felt a sudden pressure around his head and ear. He fell on his knees, blood leaking out his left ear. Lee put hands on his ears feeling a sharp pain. Sasuke clenched his teeth, feeling his head ringing like a bell and every ring felt like a hammer was hitting him all over again. "You're good, Uchiha Sasuke," Dosu spoke slowly, revealing his sleeve. Half his mask was burned, his skin around his shoulder and chest was burned, but nothing he couldn't ignore for now. Sasuke clenched his teeth, seeing no way out of this one, but Lee immediately stood up and rushed at him. Dosu was about to use his sound again when he felt his whole body freeze. Lee had stopped moving as well. Sasuke looked in confusion when he saw their shadows were very long going towards a bush near them. "This is very troublesome, but I'm afraid I can't let you harm them." Sasuke looked as Team 10 came out, Shikamaru's shadow connecting with Lee's and Dosu's shadow. Choji stood close as Ino walked towards Sakura, seeing her in bad shape. "Now, you will either leave or what?" Shikamaru asked, looking at Dosu, leaving not many options. Dosu felt a shiver run his whole body. He knew he couldn't move a muscle in this situation. Kin was out for the count, Zaku could hardly move due to the pain, but if he failed his master, he would most definitely kill them without mercy. Before he could speak up, they heard clapping. Everyone turned to look as a team walked out. Their IWA headbands made Shikamaru curse his luck. Ino felt a shiver through her whole body as she was trying to heal Sakura. "This is very interesting, isn't it?" Chapter 59, A Cursed Uzumaki. Year 79 OSH, Age of Shinobi. Uzushiogakure no Sato was a village that was world-renowned for their fuinjutsu. So renowned in fact that its famous reputation led to the destruction of the village out of fear during the Third Shinobi World War. 3 villages took part in a campaign against the residing shinobi, the Uzumaki. The Uzumaki clan were fierce but noble warriors ranging from honorable samurai to shinobi and kunoichi, respectively. While the village did not have a large military per se, what they lacked in numbers they made up for in skill and sheer tenacity. After all, quality triumphs quantity, at least, that is what the people of Uzushiogakure believed in. However, the unthinkable happened when 3 mighty nations stood at the doorsteps of the small but significant village of Yuzu. Their armies were vast and very intimidating. The Uzumaki, however, were steadfast. Their resolve was steeled. They were ready to lay their lives down to protect what they believed in. Many have heard of the village Konoha no Sato and their will of fire. But that saying was soon to be overshadowed by Uzushiogakures will of life. The enemy, Iwagakure, Kumogakure, Kirigakure, and a 4th unknown party, stood stationary as the Yuzu warriors stood upon the walls of their village overlooking their advisory. The roaring whirlpools were almost deafening in the face of silence between the 3 massive armies. The calming misty ocean breeze swept across the mighty force tickling their necks, almost as if a temptation, a calling, an invitation to death. Heavy dark clouds hovered overhead, a disadvantage that left them open to Kumo and Kiri's long-range jutsu. A large boom of thunder echoed throughout the lands of Yuzu, which was soon followed by a bright flash and then a crackle of lighting. An exploding roar erupted from the mass of all 3 armies. They burst forwards, intent on destroying their foes for their masters. This day would be forever marked down in history as the Great Loss. They would soon realize that the Uzumaki were not simply trifled with. "Yuzukage-sama!" bellowed a deep yet powerful voice. A handsome young man, no older than 16, stood at an average height of 5 feet and 9 inches. His blood-red hair was tied in a ponytail with his bangs covering the left side of his face, while 2 long strips of hair flowed straight down both sides of his chiseled frame. He wore a simple dark black loose kimono with light blue highlights. On his hips sat 2 well-crafted swords, a katana, as well as a wakizashi, both of which had their hilts wrapped in elegantly crafted purple and white material. His name is Uzumaki Nozomi, an elite Umbu Phoenix captain with incredible skill in all aspects of the shinobi arts. Standing at attention behind his leader, the Yuzukage, or as most knew him, Ashina Uzumaki. Most would mistake him for a simple old man, 139 years old. However, this is not the case. The way he moved and held himself spoke waves of power, discipline, and respect. He carried the legendary katana. Dark blood was known throughout the whole world as the most powerful sword to exist, used by the Sage of 6 Paths himself, the god of shinobi. Report, the Yuzukage, Ashina Uzumaki, said in an even yet serious tone. "Hi. It seems the enemy has an advantage over us in both numbers and the elements. They're attacking from 4 sides. And have our village surrounded. The estimated time for arrival is imminent. The enemy has delayed our request for reinforcements from our allies. All teams sent out to scout possible weak points in the enemy's location, and possible tactics have yet to return, meaning they're most likely Kia. It seems we are on our own this day, Yuzukage-sama, Nozomi reported in a grim voice, and a harsh response was given. The older man let out a weary sigh as he knew what would soon unfold. Looking over his shoulder, he saw men and women prepared to die for their beliefs, for their country, but above all for each other. You did well, my boy. However, you know as well as I what will happen on this day. And I am afraid for you and our people, Ashina spoke in a hushed voice while his gaze turned down slightly as if pondering something weighing on his shoulders over the past few days. Yuzukage, Nozomi spoke by, was firmly interrupted as Ashina raised his hand. Turning around, he faced Nozomi as well as the other shinobi, kunoichi, and samurai that made up the Uzumaki. This day we are equals, titles are foregone, as of now I am no longer the Yuzukage. But instead, a warrior alongside my fellow comrades and family. He spoke, gathering all the attention from his forces. Hi, father. Nozomi spoke respectfully with a small smile gracing his lips and then bowed his head deeply. The rest of the men and women soon followed and gave their leader, friend, and comrade their respects. Pride swelled within Ashina as he too bowed deeply, returning the gesture to his fellow Uzumaki, while at the same time fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Mustering up a serious face in spite of the death that was sure to come, Ashina spoke steadily. What I am asking of you is no simple task. But yet, I know that by you standing here with me, I have your answer, he spoke with a soft smile. He gazed at their faces, forever etching them into his mind. Soon his gaze fell back onto Nozomi, his one and only son, who stood there patiently waiting for his father's orders. Nozomi, my son. I want you to lead the Umbu Corps to intercept the enemy before they breach our walls and we are overrun. Ashina commanded as Nozomi gave a quick hi, he and his Umbu disappeared in a swirling tide of water. As for the rest of you, you're going to follow me to meet the enemy at the northern gate. He yelled as a loud choir of HI rang throughout the area. Going through some quick hand seals, he slammed his hands down onto the walls of the village and erected a barrier protecting the citizens within the village. Withdrawing his katana, he gave a mighty shout. For Yuzu. Ashina's mighty roar could be heard by the enemy Kage who were a few miles away. And with that, he jumped down to attack the enemy as his forces soon followed him. After Nozomi Shansin, he immediately appeared in front of the quickly approaching enemy along with his fellow Umbu appearing beside him. I won't let you down, father, Nozomi thought before preparing a very fast set of hand seals for a jutsu. Futon, Detapa. Nozomi shouted as he blew out a powerful blast of wind towards the enemy. He soon followed up with another set of hand seals Kanashibari no Jutsu. Nozomi thought as his first technique hit the enemy, they were blasted by a powerful force that halted and disoriented them momentarily. As soon as his second technique activated, the enemy found that they were paralyzed and could not move. Tiger now! Nozomi yelled to one of his fellow Umbu and Uzumaki. Right! Tiger shouted already amidst his own hand seals. Calling out in a serious and deadly tone, Suetun, Koko. The effect was immediate. A rain of oil fell over the few dozen or so Kaki ninja battering them with thick globs of oil. Quickly releasing his second jutsu, Nozomi flew through hand seals and shouted, Karyu Enden. He exhaled a large stream of fire towards the oil-soaked rock, mist, and lightning ninja. As soon as the fire hit its target, a large fire explosion erupted on the battlefield, shocking and unnerving the rest of the oncoming enemy. Wasting no time, all 25 Umbu, including Nozomi, appeared in front of the next wave of enemy shinobi and quickly flew through a blur of hand seals. Katon, Heizukisho. They yelled together as clouds of superheated ash bathed the surrounding area around them. The enemy soon covered inside the dense clouds of ash began screaming in pain as their bodies received third-degree burns. Simultaneously Nozomi and his men clicked their teeth together, and the results were instantaneous. Boom! An earth-shattering blast rocketed the small island of Yuzu. Ally and enemy alike stopped to witness the large plum of fire rising in the sky. This was to be the start of the Third Shinobi World War. This is the day that Kumo, Kiri, and IWA will never forget. A day where 100,000 enemy forces stood against a measly 1,500 Uzumaki warriors. And lost more than half of their men and women to battle against a superior foe. For every Yuzu warrior lost, over thousands of enemies would fall. This day over 100,000 IWA, Kyumo, and Kiri shinobi would lose their lives. The exchanging of jutsus clashing each other tore the landscape and scarred the once beautiful land of whirlpools. Thick black smoke burned high and could be seen as far as the eye could see. As for the village itself, it was no longer recognizable. Nothing left but scorched ruins, ash, and soot. Die! Screamed an IWA shinobi as he tried to bring his sword down on an unsuspecting Nozomi. He gracefully maneuvered out of the attack he easily countered with his katana. Doing a simple shunsin to appear behind the shinobi, he then sliced his sword at the shocked man's head. The end result was beheading and the end of another life by his hands. Not wasting time, he quickly fell back into position with the two remaining Umbu. Tiger, Snake, it seems we are all that's left, Nozomi said as he got back into position. They have been fighting for 3 days straight with little to no rest at all. The enemy just kept coming and showed no signs of relenting. Nozomi grit his teeth in frustration. They were losing, and it was only a matter of time before they met the same fate as the rest of their comrades. Hi Nozomi-sama, it seems you're right, Tiger spoke before quickly turning to Snake. They both nodded before rushing behind Nozomi and swiftly brought a hand chop to the back of his neck, rendering him unconscious. Being so tired and weary from constant battle, Nozomi didn't expect a thing, especially from his fellow Uzumaki. Snake, follow through with the Uzukage's final wishes. This is to be your last mission. It was an honor to serve with both you and Nozomi-sama. I will hold off the enemy as long as I can. I hope it will be enough to give you time to make the proper preparations. Tiger spoke in a stern voice. Hi, Tiger Taitochi, Snake spoke as he picked up Nozomi's unconscious body. Before Snake was about to leave, Tiger spoke once again. Please, call me Fumio, Fumio Uzumaki, Tiger said as he removed his mask. Giving Snake a small smile. It was an honor, Fumio-san. You may call me Hisoka Uzumaki. Snake said as he too removed his mask and smiled in return. Amaya's cousin, ha. Fumio said. A quiet hi was given a Hisoka, grabbed Nozomi, and disappeared in the traditional Uzumaki shunsin. May Kami be with you, Fumio thought as he turned to face an onslaught of enemy shinobi. I will take you, bastards, to hell. He yelled before going through a few semi-long hand seals. A large explosion occurred, engulfing the entire area, effectively killing all within 100-meter radius. A large grin was all the last thing he managed to give as he too was caught in the blast. And so was the end of Fumio Uzumaki. Sensing that Fumio was no longer alive, he knew he had little time. Hisoka quickly hid Nozomi's unconscious body underneath some debris, hiding him the best he could and then placing a high-level genjutsu and sealing array over his body that would be difficult to detect even for a strong sensor shinobi. His mission was complete. Immediately turning around, he went off to draw the attention of the shinobi in the area away from Nozomi's location. I will be meeting you all soon, especially you, Amaya, were the last thoughts of Hisoka before he too would eventually meet his fate on the battlefield. On one side of the battlefield, Kia Uzumaki kept slicing Kyumo shinobi left and right, jumping away, a seal spread all around her body, ready to lose her life for the future of the Uzumaki clan. Her heart beating speed up, as a word slowly appeared on her right palm, as the red strike of Kyumo, an SS-rank Sannin, landed in front of her. His name is Dakata Jitego, of Clan Jitego, known for their red lightning. You killed my whole squad, what's your name? The man in front of her asked with respect, his right palm engulfed in red lightning. My name is Kia Uzumaki, the Red Rain. Kia introduced herself. Knowing who was in front of her, she knew she couldn't win. That left only one option. Kia Uzumaki, I will remember the name with that. The red strike rushed with his palm aimed at her. Kia didn't have time to block it, activated a healing fuinjutsu on her shoulder as the strike hit her stomach, launching her. She was slammed against the concrete, her stomach bleeding. She quickly stood up, knowing she needed to do something fast, as he tried to strike again. As Kia put her arm in front of the strike as the symbol on her left palm shines. Soul fuinjutsu. Before he could strike again, her palm touched his chest as the strike hit her again. The building crumbled. Kia was lying on the ground defeated, her right arm gone but still with a smile on her face, seeing the Sannin suddenly stop and fall on his knees, spitting out blood as lines spread from his chest around his body, extending purple marks. What did you do to me? The Sannin asked through extreme pain, his nose, ears, eyes, and mouth bleeding blood. Kia smiled as the same symbol spread from her left palm around her body. Soul Fuinjutsu, one touch of my palm, and both of us will die. I gave my life to this Fuinjutsu, Kia said as pain spread around her body, her vision got blurry, her nose, ears, eyes, and mouth bleeding. A laugh was heard from the Sannin as he barely stood on one knee looking at her. At least I will die, how I always wanted. His body fell on the ground dead, and so did Kia, who closed her purple eyes for the last time. Summoning Jutsu. A light suddenly illuminated the whole battlefield as the phoenix of their leader ascended from the sky, the Phoenix Janus. The leader stood at the top of the phoenix, ready to rain fire on his enemies when, suddenly, a shadow fell on him, and as he raised his head, he saw another phoenix, larger than his own and as black as a starless night. The two phoenix collided with each other as the fighting continued. Hiruzen Sarutobi, now. The Hokage couldn't help himself but look at the two photos in front of him, and he wondered why the sudden appearance of not one but two Uzumaki, not mentioning Naruto, reported that one of them was named Karen Uzumaki. It had been a long time, but Hiruzen remembered Kushina coming to him several times after Yuzu was destroyed, mentioning if anyone with the name Izanaka Uzumaki and her daughter Karen Uzumaki had been spotted. Izanaka was Kushina's sister, therefore, Hiruzen had sent a squad to search everywhere but to no avail. He wondered if he could have done something more to prevent the destruction of Yuzu. Are you certain about this, Hokage-sama? The third Hokage blew out smoke from his pipe as he stared at the large council gathered in front of him. Usually, for out-of-the-blue meetings like this, it was enough for only the advisors to be present, but the clan heads were also in attendance. That was something of a rarity, given that they were currently in the midst of war. The topic of the meeting was not even about war. Well, not their war. Sarutobi Hiruzen placed the pipe down after another exhale of smoke, and he leveled the clan head, who spoke a tired, but stern gaze. I certainly am, Akimichi. He replied, ignoring how the plump man frowned uncertainly at his answer. I believe this is a reasonable request from our allies, and it would not harm us to lend our aid to them. But we're at war, Hokage-sama. One of his advisors exclaimed. We don't have the time nor the resources to spare these people. Haven't you thought of that? The jab at his reasoning made him glare at the man, and the threatening aura that filled the room made everyone flinch. What kind of Hokage do you think I am? Of course, I've thought about it. I'm just not the kind of man who would leave his allies to die after such a horrible tragedy. And what a tragedy it is. Sarutobi turned to another member of the advisor council, the one with the dark hair and bandages around his face. He narrowed his eyes as the man casually placed his hands on the table. A prestigious clan like that destroyed out of fear of its unrivaled sealing techniques. He seemed to tut in shame and disappointment, but nobody could tell if he was condescending or genuinely sympathetic. The Uzumaki clan did not deserve to be so unfairly outmatched and annihilated. The third Hokage grunted. I agree. Our allies were no match for the sudden invasion of Kiri Shinobi. They were outnumbered 3-1, and that included children and civilians. He looked at the scroll in his hands, unfolded to display a short, quick request for sanctuary. A swirl-like pattern was printed at the end of the message, indicating that it had been signed and sent by an acting clan head. Uzumaki Eizu, he read the hastily drawn signature. His brow furrowed when he realized that he recognized the name. Grandson of Elder Ashina, that doesn't make any sense, a clan head spoke up to break the silence, and Sarutobi looked up to see a confused-looking Yamanaka glaring at the table. Uzushiogakure is not part of this war. Why would anyone seek to destroy it? Fear, was the short reply from a slouched clan head next to him. Anara, obviously. Danzo-sama has already mentioned that the clan is known for its powerful sealing abilities. With a power like that, any nation would attempt to seize it for themselves, or destroy it. And Uzushio is an ally of Konoha. The head of the Inazuka clan somberly added, and Nara's head nodded. That's right. Getting rid of the Uzumaki clan was probably an attempt to diminish Konoha's power. The Nara head then snorted, leaning back in his seat. Too bad they completely forgot that a clan full of seal masters would have some sort of backup plan in case an invasion happens. Sarutobi nodded at this, and he couldn't help but be thankful for that. Uzushiogakure is indeed comprised of promising and powerful shinobi, but their numbers were barely half of the number of shinobi in hidden villages like Kirigakure. The very name of that village made the Hokage narrow his eyes in confusion and suspicion. That village was not part of this war. What were they planning? Are they planning on joining the war, after all? He thought, tightening the hold of his joined hands. In any case, the bespectacled advisor spoke up, and he turned to the Hokage. What happened to the Uzumaki clan is unfortunate, but I strongly believe this is not our concern. Our efforts should be concentrated on the war that we are currently fighting. Hamura is correct. The only female on the advisory council, Yuditane Koharu, agreed. Konoha has many enemies, and if we let our guard down for just a moment, we could end up like the Uzumaki clan. We shouldn't even be talking about this. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes at his former teammates. While what they said made absolute sense, he himself did not want to abandon the survivors of the Uzumaki clan. They had aided Konoha in the First Shinobi World War, and now when they needed help, was it right for Konoha to simply turn its back on them? And not to mention, the Shodame's wife was an Uzumaki herself. The way they nonchalantly rejected an ally's request made him sick to the stomach. But before he could voice out any of these thoughts, he was taken aback when the man whose support he did not expect suddenly spoke up. I say we welcome the Uzumaki clan to Konoha. The conference room was silent. Even the soft murmurings stopped. Everyone turned to look at Shimura Danzu, whose face did not betray anything. The ones who knew him well looked at him in shock. Danzu? Koharu turned and practically screeched. Do you realize what you're saying? Added Hamura, though he was more restrained than his fellow advisor. Danzu was not looking at them but rather at the Hokage whose suspicious gaze he calmly met. The man shifted in his seat to turn towards Danzu. I can't say I'm not glad for the support, but, he paused. What is your reason for thinking this, Danzu? The man leaned back in his seat as he started to explain. First of all, it should be mentioned that the Uzumaki clan is an ally of Konoha. The clan has aided us in the past, surely, we should be gracious enough to do the same in their time of need. Also, the clan is comprised of talented Fuinjutsu users. Something that, I believe, would aid us to win this war. The Hokage narrowed his eyes. There we go. The man's true motive. You would have them join this war right after surviving the destruction of their village. It's giving and take, Hokage-sama. Danzu didn't flinch when the Hokage glared at him for the subtle jab at his title. As the advisors have mentioned, it would take a considerable amount of time, effort, and resources to house the Uzumaki clan refugees. I suggest that, in return for offering them refuge, we request that any able shinobi among them would be included in the war effort. That is fair, Hamura conceded, rubbing his chin in thought. Even Koharu looked like she was changing her mind about the issue, and with their knowledge on Fuinjutsu, the Uzumaki clan would be able to teach our shinobi their techniques. It would add to Konoha's growing repertoire of powerful jutsu. She added, nodding to herself. You think they would gladly share their secrets, Yuditane-sama? A clan head spoke up. It was the Hyuga head. Not all, no. But enough to give our shinobi an advantage in the field. One does not need to be an Uzumaki to learn Fuinjutsu, after all. All thoughts went to a certain white-haired jounin currently in Amigakure. Everyone listening nodded in agreement. The Hokage sighed. It seemed like most everyone agreed to welcome the Uzumaki clan, but for the wrong reasons. He supposed that there was no helping it, but still. He frowned. What would Hiroshima-sama do in this situation, he wondered. Does anyone else have anything to say regarding this issue? He lifted his pipe to his mouth and asked. When no one seemed to want to add anything, he inhaled through his pipe and sighed. If that is so, I call for a vote. All in favor of offering refuge to the survivors of the Uzumaki clan? He watched as hands rose in the air, some slower than the others. He observed that even the clan heads who had been vocal about their skepticism were now raising their hands. Perhaps the points raised by Danzu had managed to convince them as well. Danzu. Of course, the man was raising his hand, but Sarutobi was unsure of his motives. The man had Konoha's best interests at heart, surely, but what was this uneasiness? The Hokage mentally counted the number of hands in the air, and he noted that everyone had voted to give them refuge. Deciding that asking for a vote for the opposite was unnecessary, he rolled the scroll in his hands closed and snapped his fingers. Immediately, a pair of Anbu appeared behind him. Bear, bird, he began. Send your teams to accompany the summoned emissary to the marked location on this scroll to meet with the survivors of the Uzumaki clan. Be sure not to waste time and lead the refugees here safely. Yes, Hokage-sama. Also, I'm pretty sure the messenger is tired. Give him a carrot or something. They acknowledged with another synchronized affirmation, and they vanished in a blink of an eye. After a moment, the pale-haired Yamanaka head cleared his throat and asked, How are we going to prepare their lodgings, Hokage-sama? And will the Uzumaki clan be recognized as a clan here as well? That will be all discussed in due time. For now, the events at Amigakure need to be examined. After a 10-minute break, the advisory council and clan heads will discuss this. As the people slowly filed out of the room to take advantage of their break, Sarutobi slouched in his seat and let out another smoky exhale. In the corner of his eye, Danzu left the council room along with the two other advisors. That uneasy feeling from a while ago returned. Just what are you planning, Danzu? He asked himself. Deep inside, he had this theory. The Hokage shuddered. He vaguely wondered if declining the Uzumaki clan's request would have been much more merciful. Naruto Uzumaki. The redhead couldn't see anything after the Dark Phoenix had attacked him. The young didn't know why he saw all that fight and why. Who attacked him? Suddenly he felt his body weightless, no pain, no weight, nothing. His body was falling as he looked down to see the whole world in front of him. He wondered when had the world had gotten so small, was it always like this? When a red bird suddenly landed on his shoulder. What's this? Naruto screamed as his body fell and fell towards the ground, not stopping. Fly, the bird said, his purple eyes piercing his soul. I can't fly, Naruto shouted back. How do you know? Have you ever tried it? The bird said. You have wings, Naruto shouted. So do you, the bird said. Naruto spread his arms and legs, but his body kept falling, the mountains now taller than him. This must be a dream. I will wake up once I hit the ground, Naruto said. You will die when you hit the ground, the bird said. Naruto felt the ground come closer and closer as he spread his arms, waiting for the impact. Chapter 60, A Snake Student. Anko. Anko would be the first to say that meeting Orochimaru was weird. The weirdest, really. From what she's heard, Orochimaru is the scariest motherfucker ever to live, and he's strange and probably conducts illegal experiments under Konoha. Still, no one can convince the Hokage of anything. So, really, upon meeting him, Anko kind of expected to be killed simply for existing, only that's the opposite of what Orochimaru does. Rather, he ensures she survives. No one's ever done such a thing for her before. Anko doesn't expect anyone to either. She assumes it was just a one-off thing. It was not a one-off thing. With new genins having graduated from the academy, Anko's been pushed closer to the war front. She now works as a messenger between various bases within Konoha-controlled land. It is, by far, more dangerous, and now she works alone. She's gotten faster, figured out better ways to lay down traps now, but that doesn't keep her safe. Due to how often she's moving and how close to the front line she is, it doesn't surprise Anko that she comes across many frontline ninjas. Most of them she's heard of, their actions being listened to back home in Konoha. Still, she's surprised when she comes across Orochimaru yet again. This time, however, he looks a lot less put together. His hair has been twisted up into a bun with spiked wire caught throughout it. Dirt and blood cover him and rips on the edges decorate his clothes. He looks exhausted, too, from where he's leaning against a tree, eyes closed and looking half asleep. Never seen the Sannin before? Someone gruffly says from beside her. Anko doesn't startle, but her hand might grip the hilt of a kunai before she relaxes. She turns to face the kunoichi, who looks just as dirty and haggard as Orochimaru. I met him in Konoha, Anko says, which is close enough to the truth that nothing else matters. He, looked different, then. The kunoichi laughs, a bitter scoff leaving her lips. Welcome to the war, kid, she says. Appearances go to shit out here, no matter how much you try. Even Orochimaru-sama knows that. And Orochimaru-sama is trying to sleep, the ninja in question says, opening one golden eye to stare at them. Your talking doesn't help. Rolling her eyes, the kunoichi replies, if you were trying to sleep, it wouldn't matter. You'd be out of it. Besides, no way are you sleeping when we're resupplying. Orochimaru sighs but opens both eyes. He considers Anko, and Anko finds herself scowling in response. Hello, Anko-chan. Hope you're doing well. Oh? You know the gremlin, Orochimaru-sama? At that, Anko goes to kick the kunoichi in the ankle because Konohanin or not, she's not going to be called a gremlin by anyone. The kunoichi dodges with a laugh and heads towards the supplies in the middle, abandoning both Anko and Orochimaru. When she looks at Orochimaru, she finds him smiling. Despite the dirt covering him, Anko can't help but think it suits him. It seems to add a new light to his eyes. Have a seat, Anko-chan. I'm not moving anytime soon, and I doubt you are either. For a second, Anko considers not doing it. She doesn't want to follow his orders, but her legs are getting tired. She drops down onto the ground and crosses her legs, glaring at Orochimaru and daring him to comment. However, he just laughs, shaking his head. You've gotten better, he offers, and, well, Anko would think it's a meaningless compliment, but this is Orochimaru, so maybe it isn't. At what? She asks, cautious because she hasn't done anything so long as she's been here. Moving silently, leaving no tracks, being ready for an attack, Orochimaru shrugs. It's easy to see in how you stand and how you act. Besides, you wouldn't have made it out here if you hadn't improved. You're capable of it, so I'm not surprised in the slightest. But, if you want, I have some advice for you. Anko considers it. Getting advice from Orochimaru would be invaluable, and she wants to live, but it's also Orochimaru, and Anko's not entirely sure if she likes him. If it's something dumb, I'm not listening. I'm also not going to call you sensei or some other shitty title. No. That's okay, Orochimaru says. I don't have students anyway. He pauses, tilting his head, and Anko folds her arms. Your chakra signature, though relatively small at the moment, thanks to your age, is still noticeable. Most people won't look for it or search for it amongst the chakra signatures flaring during a battle. However, there is a chance people can locate you by it and hunt you down as a result. I can't do anything about that. You can't use chakra and hide your chakra signature. That's just impossible. It's tricky, Orochimaru counters. You need to pull your chakra into your core and only let a little bit trickle out of your feet. You can do this, and I dare say you'd be good at it, you only need to try. Scowling, Anko does as he asked, but only because he seems legit. She finds her chakra in her chest, bubbling and flickering ever so slightly. Slowly, she crushes it down into something small, wraps it around her spine to hide it. She almost can't feel it, with how dim it becomes. She glances at Orochimaru, who's smiling. Good work, he says. Now, try to channel some into your feet while keeping your chakra hidden. This is where Anko thinks things will fail. Her chakra is almost out of reach, but she manages to send a trickle down to her feet. It pools there, not enough to actually tree hop with, but after a few moments, she finds she has enough to do so. I did it. Anko says, grinning, before remembering who's in front of her and scowls. It's too late, though, and Orochimaru's eyes crinkle up in what could be a smile. I knew you could, he says. Nicely done. You've picked that up faster than anyone I've ever taught to do that. Anko sniffs. Well, I am pretty good, she agrees. Then, after a pause, she says cautiously, you got anything else to teach me? Not that I'm your student. But it'd be useful, you know. For a moment, Orochimaru just stares at her before getting to his feet. Alright, he says. Let's get to work. The night was dark and peaceful. Gray clouds shrouded the moon's unearthly luminous glow from showering its light upon the village hidden in the leaves. No stars were visible in the black sky, no trace of human life could be heard or seen within the quiet darkness. The citizens of the Leaf Village were snuggled in their warm beds, their heads filled with sweet dreams. All but for one, that is. In her small apartment bedroom, a beautiful, yet tormented, Kunoichi twisted and turned under the covers of her twin-sized bed. Her lithe form, young and taut with her youth, was coated with cold sweat from head to toe. Anko Mitarashi awoke with a violent jolt, her ragged and broken gasps trying to force down oxygen into her lungs. She couldn't breathe, it hurt too much to do so. Her chest felt incredibly tight, her gut clenching at the pain that was resonating throughout her body, originating from a single spot on the left side of her neck. It was the very thing that kept reminding her of the agony and sorrow she had to face every day for the rest of her life. It was an indelible brand, like a scar that was burned deep within her soul. Heaven's curse mark. Anko brought up her right hand to claw at the mark, her fingernails making rivulets of blood that seeped down her neck and onto and under her mesh bodysuit she wore all the time. There were days when the curse mark would pulsate, as it would react to her nightmares and thoughts, but it was never as bad as what she was feeling now. The pain was more excruciating this time, almost like if he was actually near her. Her spiky ponytail that held her violet hair together stuck to her forehead from the sweat, her bangs were covering her tired pupilless brown eyes. She grimaced at the waves of pain flowing through her each time the curse mark throbbed, her teeth biting down her bottom lip to prevent her from hollering out in pain. Tears brimmed the corners of her eyes, but the snake kunoichi refused to let them fall down her heart-shaped face. Tears were a sign of weakness, a disgrace not only to the shinobi rules but also to herself, and that was why she couldn't bring herself to let it pour down her round cheeks. She would never allow anyone to see them, not even to herself. She was a strong and reliable kunoichi of the Hidden Leaf Village, who faced the world with a tough and confident aura without caving into anyone or anything. She was not some small child who would break down over a nightmare. And yet, here she was, weeping over the vivid nightmare that still haunted her every thought. It didn't matter whether she was awake or asleep, the memories of his twisted smirk, his demonic laughter, his captivating, spellbound eyes flooded back into her mind, along with the fear that had cut through her life like a razor-sharp blade and penetrated her to the hilt. She masked her anguish with a happy facade, all of her true, melancholy emotions pent up inside her. Moisture from around her eyes threatened to spill out from her again, but Anko held them back, not wanting all the barriers she'd built over the years crumble over as something as unwelcome memories. "Stop it, now," she chastised herself in a vehement whisper into the lucid darkness, her voice rasped and strained. "Get a grip, Anko." Her hands journeyed up to her scalp, her nails clutching her wet purple strands. The nightmare was still repeating over and over in her head. The fear she felt even in her dreamland was as real as anything she could feel in reality, and that frightened her to no end. She hated it, she hated him for causing her so much overwhelming sorrow and anger stirring within her. She wondered when there would ever be a day when he didn't invade her every thought, regret. Will there ever be a day when she could forget about him and stop living in her shattered past that she barely possessed any recollection of? She wished she could forget everything. Forget him. Forget that she had cared and admired him because, in the end, all she got in return was his betrayal. He abandoned her when he was the only thing she had left in the world. He cast her off when he deemed her useless, tossing her aside as if she was trash. He would pay, one day. Then maybe he will see just how useless she was now. She would be there, a kunai in her fisted right hand, her eyes blazing with fire and bloodlust, and he would be dead. It was her duty, her atonement, her vendetta. It was that sole reason that kept her alive to this very day. She had struggled onto what was like a thin spider thread of life, clinging desperately onto it as a way to stop herself from dying at anyone else's hands. Her tears began to stream down her face and splattered down onto her bed sheets, creating dark marks on them. Her knees curled up into her chest, and she wrapped her arms around them, her now red and puffy face buried in them. The silence was broken when her muffled sobs and wails echoed in her bedroom, her hot tears stinging her cold skin. She couldn't shake off the nightmare, it brought back so many unwanted memories racing through her mind that she could never forget. In the dream, she was there within the vast darkness, bloody and broken. His golden eyes glowered down at her with a wicked smile plastered on his pale lips. She cried and screamed out in pain and torment, her body felt like wildfire was coursing in her veins. Ugh! The violet-haired woman cursed under her breath, the curse mark pulsating in conjunction with her hatred and misery. She wished she'd never met him at all if she'd known the cost. Anko sniffled back her tears, her eyes flickering over to the photos she kept on the long desk that reached from behind her bed. She gripped the photo of the most precious memory to her, the picture of her, Kakashi, and a younger Naruto. She pressed the photo into her chest. How much she wished that Kakashi was with her tonight, but Anko had said that she needed to be there in time, unlike some jonin she knew. A chuckle escaped her mouth, remembering the face Kashikuin made when she made that comment. She needed to rest for the next day. The Chunin exams were tomorrow, and she needed to be her usual cheerful self to avoid any unnecessary concern or worry from the few people she actually counted as her friends. She shook off the horrid images of her nightmare and breathed out a deep sigh before succumbing into slumber, droplets of tears trickling down her cheeks. She tried not to think of her former mentor but rather thinking of the excitement she would feel to see this year's Chunin exams candidates. She looked forward to see how many would actually pass her test and how well Naruto would do. She was, after all, the proctor for the second phase of the exams. As she slept, she couldn't help but think what life would be like if she were to discard her tortured emotions from her scarred soul. How simple it would be for her to live if she'd forgotten Orochimaru, about the curse mark, about everything. How easy it would be to throw away all of those uninvited memories that rushed through her head every day of her life into a bottomless sea and just pretend that they never happened. She could be happy, maybe even normal. However, whether the violet-haired woman knew it or not, her hatred, memories of the one she held, and will continue to hold, was better left in the depths of her wounded heart rather in the depths of the sea. Tomorrow. The forest was dark and large, with densely overgrown trees and enormous, man-eating creatures inhabited inside of it. All of the gates were locked with signs warning anyone of its dangers, and at the side of the area was the scroll distributing shed, where 3 other proctors sat, observing the snake kunoichi and the candidates. It was the perfect spot for the kiddies to undergo the second phase of the exam and move on to the third exam. That is, if they survive it first. Whoa. Nice place. What is it? Sakura inquired in a frightened tone. This is the location for the second phase of the exam. It's the 44th Battle Training Zone. She paused as the fear sank deeper into the kids, smiling. But we call it the Forest of Death. The ominous name of the zone caused an uproar, a group of fearful mutters and worried expressions among the genin, each of them staring deeply into the vast forest. This whole place just completely creeps me out. Anko heard the scared pink-haired girl said. Anko chuckled, smiling broadly. It should, they called it the Forest of Death. And soon enough, you're gonna find out why. After throwing the kunai at Naruto and him catching it with his 2 fingers. Seems like everyone here today is quick-tempered. There must be something in the air. Anko smirked in anticipation at the fun that was soon to come. This is gonna be fun. Quick-tempered? Sheesh. You're the one who threw the kunai at me. Naruto said inside his head, his eyes tracking out Anko as she headed back to front to face all of the genin. Now, before we begin this test, I've something to hand out to you all. The snake kunoichi reached in her coat and held out a pile of paper in her right hand to show to the genin. It's just a standard consent form. Before the test, all of you are going to have to read over this form and then sign it. What for? A blonde girl asked. Some of you may not come back from this test, and I have to get your consent to that risk. Otherwise, it'll be my reasonability. Anko explained with a sheepish smile and laugh. Murmurs filled the crowd again, worried and scared looks surfacing on some of the kids' faces. After explaining the rules of the exam, almost everyone was frightened to continue with the Chunin exam. Raising his hand as if he was asking permission to speak inside a classroom, Shikamaru piped up. So, let's say in mid-exam, can we quit? Anko swiveled her head to frown at the lazy boy. Of course not. In the middle of a battle, you can't say, sorry, I quit. Smiling, she let out a couple of chuckles. Well, I guess you can, but it will only get you killed. Oh, just great. This is gonna a drag, the Nara boy complained, arms folded across his chest as he received an annoyed look from his female teammate while his best friend was munching down on some chips. Ignoring the boy, Anko turned her attention back to the rest of the genin, holding out 3 fingers one by one as she explained the rules for the test. There are also some ways you can get disqualified. The first is simple, if all 3 members of a team can't make it to the tower with both scrolls after 5 days. Number 2, if a team loses a member or if a member becomes incapacitated and cannot continue. But most importantly, none of you, absolutely none of you, may look at the contents of the scrolls until you've reached the tower. And with that said, all of the kids got into their teams and talked over their consent form, while some of them wandered off on their own to read it over. The air was heavy with anticipation, worried and eagerness. Meanwhile, the other proctors drew up a curtain at the scroll distribution shed, ensuring no one else would know which team had which scroll. It looks like they're starting to understand what's really involved in this test. Anko observed the crowd of genin with her hands in her coat pockets, pleased that some of them just realized how serious this test is. Her eyes lingered the most on Naruto, sitting on the ground, writing something on a large blank paper. She liked that determination in his blue eyes, and something told her that Naruto would make these Chunin exams far more interesting than any other exam ever. Once everyone was ready to hand in their forms, Anko watched as they headed to the shed to collect their scrolls. A slight breeze wafted through her violet hair, and a smile graced her lips. I wonder if any of them will survive this, except Naruto. Staring down at her wristwatch on her right arm, reading it as it was close to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Anko's loud voice carried among the genin. Listen up. All of the teams had received their scrolls, so everybody go to your gate and waited there. When the gates open, the test is on. When it was close to 2:30, the proctors started to unlock the gates, letting the chains slide off the handles. As the clock struck precisely at 2:30, the snake Kunoichi finally gave out her last announcement. "Alright, heads up, you maggots. The second part of the test has begun." The gates opened with a whoosh as soon as she spoke those words, and in went the genin. It wasn't long afterward until Anko heard a couple of male fearful screams vibrating throughout the forest and to where Anko stood at the entrance. A few hours later, Anko sat on the flat roof of the shed, her legs hanging in the air as she snacked down on her favorite food, enjoying herself while she paid no mind to the carnage that was taking place within the forest of death. Nothing makes dumplings goes down like a little sweet red bean soup. Ah! Nice! She happily sipped down the can of soup and then another bite off her stick of dumpling. Guess it's about that time. Soon after I finish this little snack, I'll see how the kitties are doing. The quicker ones will be finishing soon. I suppose I'll wait and go greet them at the tower. She munched down the last dumpling on her stick. She lazily threw to the trunk of a nearby tree with perfect accuracy without even looking, adding the last stick to complete an outline of a leaf symbol that was made out of at least 50 dumpling sticks, a testament of how much she loved her village as much as her favorite food. There, a perfect leaf village symbol. Anko smiled brightly at her completed design. In a puff of smoke, a sentinel dressed in the standard Chunin exams proctor uniform appeared before the snake Kunoichi, kneeling down on one knee. It was Mizuku, one of the other proctors for the exams. "Pardon, ma'am, there's a problem." What sort of problem?" Anko inquired calmly, swinging her legs from left to right. "Corpses, ma'am." "3 of them," came the urgent reply. However, Anko remained nonchalant about the news. Hearing about dead bodies wasn't anything new. People were killed in the Chunin exams all the time. Whatever they found was probably the remains of a bunch of kids that got themselves slaughtered in the exams. Mumbling, she continued to munch down her dumpling in her mouth as she replied in a slightly bored tone, "Come on. I'm trying to eat here. I think you'll want to see them. There is something strange about them," Mizuku told her. That caught Anko's interest as she swallowed the last of her food down in her throat, putting a finger to her chin. What could be so weird about corpses, besides being dead? She voiced her thoughts out loud. When Anko arrived at the area, her stomach lurched at the gruesome sight in front of her. She gazed down at the awkwardly twisted positions that bodies were laid face down on the ground and against the Leaf Village's Buddha statues as fear sliced through her. It wasn't the splattered blood across the Buddha statues that bothered her, nor was it the rancid smell of the 3 dead bodies radiating off them. What really frightened the brave and tough Kunoichi the most was the fact that their faces were gone as if something or someone ripped them off. The wind blew in the trees, sending chills down Anko's spine, giving the area an even more terrible aura to it. I went through their belongings, found their identification, ninja from the Hidden Grass Village. All 3 of them were registered for the Chunin exams. Kotetsu Hagane, one of the other proctors for the exams, reported with his arms crossed over his chest. They weren't just killed, all their faces. Anko felt her fingers twitched at the nervousness she felt rising up inside her, almost curling into a fist. She felt disturbed. An uneasy feeling of remembrance was nagging at the back of her brain. It was something darkly familiar. "They're gone." "Yeah." Kotetsu frowned grimly at the dead bodies. "There's nothing where their faces used to be, like they melted or something." Anko grasped at her curse mark, her right making its way almost unconsciously to where it was branded on her neck. She gazed down at one of the genin, trying desperately to remember where she had seen that clothing before. No doubt about it. She thought gravely, clenching her teeth together so tightly that it would seem like they were going to break. She closed her fingers over the mark that she had loathed so much ever since he gave it to her. This is his jutsu. Why is he here? What's he doing at the Chunin exams? Naruto. She felt her body almost trembling at the terror swirling within her, sounds of shaking gasps escaping her lips. Snapping out of her own thoughts, she turned to the Chunin behind her, pivoting around in a panicked state. "Okay, I need photos of what these 3 used to look like. Where are their IDs?" "Right here, ma'am." Mizuku handed her the pictures. She gripped the photos in her hand, recognizing the first image of the grass ninja immediately. So this is the face he stole. The snake Kunoichi's eyes widened at the realization, and she gasped in shock, remembering Naruto glaring at the Kunoichi. Had it already happened when? Ugh! We've got big trouble. She swiveled around to face Kotetsu and the other two Chunin, all of them startled by her alarmed and urgent tone. Okay, get moving. Tell Lord Hokage exactly what's happened here. And while you at it, tell the ANBU Black Ops they better get a couple of convoys to the Forest of Death. She turned her back to them before she went on. Meanwhile, I'm gonna head in after these guys. Now go. Right. The three men disappeared from her sight at once, knowing better to follow her orders and ask questions later. He's come. He's here in the Hidden Leaf Village. Anko reached for her neck again, her face becoming dark and dangerously serious as a foul wind moved in the air. All of her bitter emotions of hate and fury boiled inside her gut, feeding off the longing to settle the score between her and the man who had cursed her life. He was here. It was time to end it. Hours passed since the violet-haired woman journeyed into the densely overgrown Forest of Death, racing through the trees and all the while avoiding out the traps and ravenous beasts in the area. The sun was setting soon, its crimson glow shining beautifully over the Hidden Leaf Village. If it weren't for the dire situation she was in, Anko would have stopped and admired the sun's blood-like blaze. She jumped from one tree to another, allowing herself to fall until her hands caught on a thick branch, using the momentum to swing herself upon it to halt her pursuit for her perpetrator, gazing as the sun was sinking further down in the sky. Sun's going down. I gotta find him soon. My odds are bad enough as it'll get worse in the dark. But why now? I hope he hadn't gotten to Naruto yet. Anko shook off her musings. She needed to find him as soon as possible. When night had fallen upon the village like a blanket, it was only then Anko's senses were able to pick his presence up. She darted through the trees, galloping from one branch to another and over many other forest obstacles that stood in her way. Her violet bangs lashed at her eyes, but she ignored it as she increased her hasty pace in the Forest of Death. I can feel him. He's somewhere close. Anko jumped down from one tree to land in a space between two enormous ones, her body running closer to he was as if she was being drawn closer to him by a magnetic force. She wondered if the curse mark had something to do with it, but she forcefully shrugged off that thought as she used her amazing reflexes and smooth acrobat movements to leap through the trees until she came to her destination. He was upside, his entire body embedded itself a tree, and to her surprise, he wasn't wearing any mask. It was ripped out, showing her his true face. His slit pupil eye opened as she landed down in front of him. She approached him almost casually, without a single hint of fear in her eyes. There was no room for it, not now. She wasn't afraid of him, or maybe she was. She just didn't show it, not in front of him. She looked at him directly with bold eyes, although the aura radiating from his body could frighten any shinobi that came in contact with him. However, Anko was different, knowing there was always that darkness, that malice in his golden eyes, even when she was under his tutelage. She was so young back then, blinded by her admiration to see what he truly was. She was so stupid, she should have seen his true, dark intentions. Orochimaru chuckled softly, amused to see his old student again. Well, Anko. It's been a while. This is no time to reminisce. You're an S-class criminal, top of the most wanted list. You've got to be taken down, and it's only fitting that I'm the one to do it. Anko replied back at him harshly as she slid senbon needles between her fingers in her right hand, not taking his bait. "'Cause, after all, you're the one that taught me everything, right, sensei?" "Not quite," he answered simply. Anko growled, preparing to throw the needles at him when his expandable, long tongue shot out from his mouth as it started to chase and lash at her. She leaped backward onto a side of a tree to dodge it, but his tongue followed and coiled itself around her wrist, forcing her to drop her weapons as he pulled her towards him. She landed on the branch, and she held out her free hand at her old sensei. Striking shadow snake. Green snakes from her sleeve slithered and crashed into the bark the tree Orochimaru was embedded in, causing a large cloud of dust. "Come out of there!" Anko yelled, pulling the serpents to force Orochimaru towards her and slammed him the tree opposite of him. She retracted the vipers into her sleeve and quickly went over to him, pinning her left hand over his right hand against the tree, stabbing them both with a kunai to prevent him from escaping her. Orochimaru was slightly surprised by her actions, observing her carefully with his exposed slit eye. She winced, panted heavily, and ignored the pain and blood flowing from the self-inflicted wound, its tangy smell invading her nostrils like a drug. "Ha! I gotcha. Now then, let me just borrow your left hand." She entwined her right hand with his left hand, sticking up her index finger and her pinky. Orochimaru gasped slightly, His eye widened in recognition and then drifted back to his old pupil. That hand sign. Right, it's over. You and I are going to die here. She gasped for air as she stared at him with tired eyes, a small fatigued smirk on her face. Taking in a deep breath, she closed her eyes and thought out the jutsu in her head. Ninja art, twin snake sacrifice jutsu. Anko stopped midway when she heard an eerie laugh echoing in the air around her. I'm afraid you will die alone, Anko. Her eyes snapped open in shock, and she gasped, pivoting her head slowly to see him standing on the other side of the massive branch, his pale features looking at her with a sneer. That's right, substitution. He indicated the duplicate she pinned to the tree. She whirled her head back to the copy, her eyes broadened even more as it melted into the mud. The moon shone down on them with its luminous light, giving Orochimaru a more oppressive aura to him. Anko heard him laughing at her near-death experience as she shut her eyes down in shame and agony, all of her confidence washing away from her. This was just too mortifying for her to endure, her gut clenching at her desperate attempt to stop him. Sauntering to her with a haughty smile, he spoke to her in a taunting tone. Of course, you're one of the elite now, a righteous warrior. How naughty of you to be using a forbidden jutsu I taught you. What do you want here, Orochimaru? She asked, hoping he hadn't hurt Naruto. Just the thought of him giving the blonde a cursed mark made her anger boil. A shadow of anger flashed through his face, much to Anko's surprise. That's not important to you, my dear student, Orochimaru spoke, hiding the anger inside him. As Orochimaru was about to attack when his body got electrocuted, and a bolt of massive lightning pierced his heart, blood flew everywhere as Anko couldn't believe the hand filled with lightning sticking outside Orochimaru's chest. The Sannin slowly turned his head around, making eye contact with the Sharingan of Kakashi Hatake. Chapter 61, Yami. Yujito. She watched as the snake Sannin disappeared into the tree, sinking inside it. His body disappeared. Yujito let out a sigh of relief. She couldn't comprehend why a Sannin like Orochimaru was here. But that didn't matter right now, he was gone, and that was what was important. Escaping her thoughts, she rushed towards Naruto. She saw him slowly closing his eyes, drifting off to sleep. She could see the slash across his torso. It was deep, his blood had leaked all over the ground. She put her hands on his shoulders and started shaking him to wake up, but he wasn't opening his eyes. Naruto, Naruto, wake up, she shouted almost desperately, but Naruto wasn't even giving the smallest sign of waking up. Looking at him, one would think he was dead, but his chest rising up and down indicated that he was still breathing. She put her ring finger just below his jawline. She smiled, feeling the pulse, and it didn't look like his heartbeat was something to be concerned with. I wouldn't worry about him, kitten, he has Kurama inside. Won't be easy to take out the bastard. Nibi suddenly spoke in her head, knowing that Kurama was the strongest Bijou for a reason. Yujito mentally nodded. She knew Kyubi was the strongest. Nibi always warned her to keep away from him, but now it seemed that Kyubi wasn't how Nibi had described him. Escaping her thoughts, she saw Karui and Omoi walking towards her. Omoi had a neutral face, but Karui was looking at her with disapproval. Yujito had felt the large explosion, the heat coming from it strong enough that even from where she stood, she had seen the grass burning. Omoi immediately had suggested ignoring it since, according to him, this could somehow lead to facing a solid opponent, her having no other option but to release Nibi, which would result in the destruction of Konoha. While the first part was actually correct, but thankfully Orochimaru went away like a dog with his tail between his legs. Yujito, I told you we shouldn't have come here, Karui shouted and pointed an accusing finger. What did you expect me to do? In case you don't know, Naruto-kun is like me. I would never leave him in the mercy of a disgusting snake like Orochimaru. Yujito spoke with venom through her clutched teeth. Despite being from Konoha, Orochimaru was very well known in every single other shinobi village, especially to Kumo, since he had abducted several children from the village. Sadly, his hideout had been found, a long time after the snake had abandoned it. Inside it, he had described finding the bodies of children and several women, but Yujito knew he had left out the disgusting parts. When they had made their way towards the explosion, Nibi had immediately told her that she could feel Kyubi nearby. Yujito had rushed towards the location only to see Naruto lying on scorched land, and the trees had been burned to ash. She had wondered what kind of jutsu had Naruto used to cause such a hot temperature. When Orochimaru had shown himself walking towards Naruto, Karui told her that Orochimaru was out of their league. If they fought, they would die with him. Therefore they needed to leave before the snake noticed them. Karui took a step back at the tone used by her friend. She knew Yujito always said that she would want to meet every Jinchuriki at least once. They could be excellent friends. She turned to Omoi to see if he had anything to say, but instead, he was quiet, which was strange for someone like him. Yujito had the right in this. If we see someone needing help and we just turn a blind eye and act as if nothing ever happened, then we are no different than the likes of Orochimaru. Omoi spoke with anger, his lollipop on his mouth broke and falling to the ground. Karui sighed, knowing Omoi's reason for despising anyone who walks away from a person needing help. To him, it wouldn't matter if it were friend or foe. Karui sighed, knowing she couldn't win this argument. Very well, what should we do with him? We can't just carry him around, Karui asked, looking at her friends but seeing their faces. That's exactly what both of them were thinking. Karui was about to protest when Omoi walked over to Naruto. He kneeled and checked his chest. His wounds are healing, but we should be careful with how we carry him. One little misstep and his wounds might reopen, and we don't have Samui here to heal him, Omoi spoke, looking from Naruto to Yujito, who had an uncertain look on her face. She pondered for a minute. At first, she thought to carry him on her back and find Samui, but Omoi had a point. After a minute of silence, Yujito seemed to break from her thoughts and looked at Omoi. What do you suggest we do? Yujito asked with a concerned tone. I suggest we wait for at least a few hours before deciding to move anywhere. Once his wound is closed up, we can move, Omoi suggested when he looked up to see. Ash! Yujito and Karui looked up as well. At first sight, it looked like ordinary snow, but looking at it again, Yujito opened her hand, falling on her hand, the smell of fire fresh all around them. Let's leave this place. It is not healthy to breathe in ash, Omoi spoke, looking up before turning to the lying figure of Naruto. He grabbed his right arm and put it around his neck, supporting his body on his. Jumping away, they made their way out from the area, Omoi being slow since it could cause the wound to open if he was faster. They soon reached an area. In the middle of a tree was an opening almost like a giant small house for birds. Yujito peeked inside, seeing straw everywhere inside but no source of anything still living inside. A few broken egg parts were lying around, larger than her arm, just one piece. Omoi walked inside and let him lay inside, his head leaning against the tree. Walking outside, both saw Karui giving them a disapproving look before crossing her arms in front of her chest. What should we do with him? Should we just wait until we find his teammates? Karui asked with a slightly higher tone. Yujito was really getting annoyed by her constant disapproval of helping Naruto-kun. First, we don't know where his teammates are and if they are even alive. To begin with, what I suggest is wait 2 days at best. If they don't show up, then we must just make our way towards the tower, Yujito stated. Thankfully they already had the 2 scrolls they needed to pass the exam. All that's left was reaching the tower. Omoi nodded in agreement, while Karui closed her eyes, pinching the bridge of her nose. She left a sight before opening her eyes again. Fine, let's just hope this doesn't come back to bite us in the ass later, Karui spoke before walking away, looking down to see if anyone was walking around near them. Yujito smiled before she turned her eyes at Naruto, who was peacefully sleeping, his eyes closed. He looked so peaceful to her. She wondered if Naruto had the same type of childhood she and B-sensei had. Later. It had been a few hours now. Yujito had checked Naruto several times to see if his condition would worsen. Thankfully Kyubi was apparently helping Naruto. Nibi suspected that it should not take that long before Naruto was awake. Yujito, why are you so insistent on helping him? Karui suddenly asked from outside the opening in the tree, crouching. She walked inside, looking at her. Is it because he's like you? Karui added, knowing her desire to meet every Jinchuriki out there. In the first exam, when the guy Ibiki Marino stated that everyone that chooses to take the question would be permanently denied ever to take another Chunin exam if they got it wrong, Yujito spoke with a slight shudder of her body, her tone almost whispering at the end. I was conflicted. A part of me was sure I would get it right, but when I looked at you two, just the thought that you two would be punished the same as me if I took the question and got it wrong. Ow, she stopped, her head lowered slightly. I almost wanted to surrender, Yujito finished. Karui almost gasped at her while Omoi looked less shocked by what she said. But then, Naruto spoke, and he lifted everyone's spirit, and mine, Yujito added with a smile on her face. Karui spoke nothing but glanced at Naruto, who was still sleeping. She was about to say something when, Oi, over here, they heard Omoi shout from outside and waving his hands at someone down below. Karui was about to yell at him for giving away their position when she saw Jitego, Samui, and Ko on the tree near them. Took a while to find you, Samui said smiling, which was something that rarely happened. She mainly was stoic and spoke only when someone spoke to her. Yujito walked outside to greet her friends. Jitego showed that they too had both scrolls. Let's leave, and perhaps we can be the first to arrive, Ko stated, preparing to leave when Jitego walked past Yujito and narrowed his eyes at the sleeping form of Naruto. What's he doing here? Jitego demanded with a tone void of emotions. Yujito walked back and stood in front of Jitego, between him and Naruto. We found him injured, we took him and decided to take care of him, Yujito stated with a slightly challenging tone, showing dominance. Jitego didn't look impressed by her Patty try to intimidate him. Why take him? He's not our problem, and where is his team? Are they dead? Samly asked with a tone slightly cold, her arms behind her neck. We don't know, and we found him fighting Orochimaru, the Sannin. Therefore we helped, Omoi stated, earning gasps from almost everyone except Jitego, who further narrowed his eyes at the redhead lying there. You're telling me, Jitego spoke and pointed the finger at Naruto, he fought a fucking Sannin, and he's still breathing? He asked, wanting confirmation of what he just heard. At this, Karui nodded her head. He's our age and already strong enough to hold his own against a Sannin like Orochimaru. No, he can become dangerous to my village, Jitego thought before his hand moved to his pouch tightened around his hips. We should kill him, he stated before he tried to walk past Yujito with his kunai on his right hand when he felt a strong grip on his forearm. His eyes turned slightly to his right, to meet with the eyes of Yujito, who looked with narrowed eyes. Her eyes are like that of Nibi Bijou. Just what do you think you're doing? Yujito asked, her grip tightening around his arm. One could swear there was steam coming out of her nose. He's an enemy of our village, he's this young and already able to stand against a Sannin, a threat like him should be eliminated, he stated with a stern tone, trying to move away his right arm. Jitego looked at her eyes directly, telling her to let him go before she regretted it. Hey guys, don't be like this, and you Jitego, just because he's strong, that doesn't mean he will eventually be an enemy to our village, Omoi spoke, trying to ease the tension between them. Karui nodded in agreement with Omoi, in a way they owned to him, and she didn't want to repay him by killing him in his sleep. He's right, if you want to kill him, at least you should do it when he's awake and not behind his back like a coward. That's not honorable, Ko stated with a disapproving tone. Samly kept quiet during all this, as Jitego sneered at Ko. Honorable? We are shinobi, this is what we do, honor is not part of our job is to eliminate every danger or possible danger to our village, Jitego stated with a finger towards Naruto. Yujito left out a growl at him. He is no danger to us, and neither to you, Jitego, and don't forget that our Kage ordered us to not kill Uzumaki Naruto but only to test his abilities, Yujito stated with a smirk on her face. Still, Jitego didn't look fazed by what she said. Yes, but we are in a forest here, anyone could have killed him, from IWA shinobi to Suna shinobi to shinobi of his own village who wants revenge against the demon fox, he said with a cold tone before he took a step forward towards Naruto. Is better to kill a child on his crib than let him grow up to be an actual danger, he spoke with a hushed tone before rushing towards Naruto when Yujito showed to his right, kicking him. Jitego landed on his feet, and he looked up to see Yujito with long nails glaring daggers at him. You want to fight me for him, he spoke with a mocking tone towards Yujito, who didn't look impressed. She was about to attack again when she heard Matatabi on her head. Kitten, we got a problem. Yeah, I know, I can see him right in front of me. No. Another problem. What? My teammates? No, another problem, she screamed in her head. What I don't, oh. She looked up along with everyone else. Almost all of them shuddered at the sight standing in a tree near them. The Jinchuriki of Nanabai glared at them with a chakra cloak and three tails behind her back. Sasuke. The Uchiha survivor looked at the IWA shinobi in confusion. His voice, in the end, sounded strange and almost frightening. He felt a chill to his bone. Shikamaru and the rest of Team 10 couldn't help but feel that something was not right with him. Even the sound shinobi felt sweat rolling down his cheek. He couldn't help but feel the pressure around the air. Who wants to go first? Inaki asked with a strange tone. His voice sounded like two people speaking simultaneously, but the second voice sounded strange. Sasuke instinctively glanced at Sakura. Ino had taken care of some of her wound. He wondered if he could fight. His hearing and head, in general, was pretty messed up by being hit by a sound wave and the other guy sending sound on his ears. He felt a constant headache, and his limbs felt light. Before Shikamaru could ask what he meant, he and everyone else gasped and shuddered when they saw his right eyes turning pitch black. No white area, just a black. Staring at it felt like staring in an endless abyss. Sasuke felt the air suddenly feel heavy. He felt like elephants were stepping on top of him. He could hardly stand on his feet. His bones around his body felt like cracking. He heard the sound like a glass shattering. His right hand snapped. Sasuke screamed in agony as he fell on his knees, looking at his hands in both confusion and fear. His hand looked as normal as could be, but the pain felt so real, his hand shaking, his heart beating on his throat like a hammer. His skin felt like something crawling around. He felt cold, his skin freezing, tiny blades piercing his skin, bleeding. He felt his cheek, his ears, and most of his face burning like he was in a freezing hell. His eyes desperately looked around but could see no one around him. His eyes looking around for anyone, nothing but the forest, no one around. He turned to look where Sakura should be but didn't see her there. "Sakura," he shouted, looking around, his eyes Sharingan as he kept trying to see where she was. "Sakura! She's dead." Sasuke grabbed his head, stopping the voice on his head. "No, no, she's not dead." "Shut up," he shouted, as everything changed. Suddenly he stood in the ice cage back at the Naruto bridge. The mirrors made of ice looked back at him. Each Sasuke looked at the one in the center with various emotions: anger, happiness, shame, pride. A genjutsu, Sasuke thought as he did the hand sign to stop it, but nothing happened. "Come on," Sasuke spoke, doing the hand sign over and over again, but nothing was changing around him. "Why isn't this working?" Sasuke shouted, his voice breaking at the end. His nails around his fingers felt like they were shattering from the cold, his breath freezing when it came out from his mouth. Suddenly he remembered how to break this if stopping the chakra flow didn't work. Without thinking, he grabbed the kunai from his pouch and plunged it deep into his leg. The blood flow hit his face, freezing on his face. The pain spread through him like a violent river, from his leg to his arms and head. Sasuke closed his eyes, expecting to return. Sasuke. Opening his eyes, he saw Haku standing with her mask on, and she looked at him, her mask half frozen. "Haku," Sasuke whispered, not sure why he saw this. "You couldn't protect me, Sasuke, you let me die." Sasuke gasped when Haku's hand went to her mask, and the mask broke before she could touch it, cracking into pieces and falling to the ground. He saw the long pink hair, her pink ninja emblem around her head. "Sakura," Sasuke whispered, not certain what he was looking at. Sakura stood in front of him with Haku's clothes. Her pink lips were a dark purple, dark bags under her eyes, her cheeks were shallow, almost sinking inside her face. "You left me to die, Sasuke-kun, just how you let your family," she spoke with his mother's voice. Sasuke had almost forgotten. "No, no, no, this isn't real," Sasuke shouted at Sakura. "This was not real, this is not reality. Why didn't you save me from Itachi?" His mother asked with Sakura's face. Sasuke grabbed his head in desperation, trying to stop all these voices. This was not real. Why am I so powerless? Why couldn't I save them? Sasuke kept repeating the questions on his head ringing like a bell, his leg bleeding, yet he couldn't feel it. He couldn't feel the pain, only the wetness of his blood leaking from his leg to the frozen ground below. Everything changed again, and he dreamt that he was back in his house, in the Uchiha compound, still standing and looking down on the rotten corpses of his parents, his mother's eye looking back at Sasuke, almost as if she was alive, their smell of sickness, their flesh slowly falling from their bodies as worms eat their flesh and bones. Until a woman emerged from the shadows and walked slowly in front of him. "Who are you?" he asked. She was all in gray. A hood and veil concealed her features, but he could see the candles burning in the dark pools of his eyes. "Who are you?" "Itachi, I am not your brother, Sasuke." She raised a pale soft hand and pushed her hood back. "Have you forgotten me? Can I forget someone I never knew?" The words caught in his throat. He did know her, but it had been so long. "Will you forget your own father too? I wonder if you ever knew him, truly." Her eyes were dark, her hair spun dark. He could not tell how old she was. 15, he thought, or 50. She walked silently around the corpses. He could never abide being cast away. That was the thing he hated most. "Who are you?" He had to hear her say it. "The question is, who are you? This is a dream. Is it?" She smiled sadly. "Look at the mirror, child." He looked at the mirror in the room. He couldn't remember there ever being a mirror. He saw himself standing alone with a Sharingan, a different one, he thought. His Sharingan was like a six-blade shuriken, and behind him stood his family, his father smiling proudly at him. He had accepted him, saw his worth, his mother touching his shoulder with a sweet smile on her face. He felt a hand, but when he looked he saw nothing. Looking at the mirror again, he saw Itachi smiling. "I'm proud of you, little brother. We all dream of things we cannot have." Fugaku dreamed that his eldest son would be a great Hokage, that his younger son would one day become the most fearsome shinobi. He dreamed they would be so strong and brave and beautiful that no one would ever put them down or cast them away. "I am a shinobi," he told her, "and Itachi is Hokage." A tear rolled down her cheek. The woman raised her hood again and turned her back on him. Sasuke called after her, but already she was moving away. her skirt whispering lullabies as it brushed across the floor. Please don't leave me, he wanted to call, but of course, she'd left them long ago. Everything changed again. He found himself standing in a bright room, the music hitting his ears, tears welling in his eyes. His family was here, they were alive. The warmth felt real, their smile felt real. Itachi was smiling at him. It was all a dream, Sasuke thought. The feast was booming around the dining room. His father had thrown it, celebrating for Itachi becoming the Hokage. The room rang with music and laughter, though the cold winds were rising outside. At first, it was all wine and roast meat, and Sasuke was making japes and saw that his team was here. They were a part of his family, Naruto laughing with Itachi, Kakashi, and Sakura. Sasuke wanted to join them, until he noticed that the room was growing darker. The music did not seem so jolly then. He heard discords and strange silences and notes that hung in the air bleeding. Suddenly the wine turned bitter in his mouth, and when he looked up from his cup, he saw that he was dining with the dead. His father sat with his guts spilling out on the table from the great gash in his belly, and his mother was slashed across the chest beside him. Corpses lined the benches below, gray-brown flesh sloughing off their bones as they raised their cups to toast, worms crawling in and out of the holes that were their eyes. He knew everyone, Ashera and Sakura, Shikamaru and Choji and Kiba, and all the others who had taken the Chunin exams. Shino and Hinata sat together, one dripping blood and the other guts. Kakashi had his Sharingan eye ripped out, worms eating inside his eye hole. Zabuza was there as well, and Haku, even the demon brothers, Naruto had killed that day. But there were others with faces he had never known in life, faces he had seen only in stone. The pale, serious face, red lines around his face, the second Hokage. His brother Hashirama stood beside him, and a man behind them just behind. Along the walls, figures half seen moved through the shadows, pale shades with long, grim faces. The sight of them sent fear shivering through Sasuke sharp as a knife. And then the tall doors opened with a crash, and a freezing gale blew down the hall, and Itachi came with his katana, the same clothes he had that night. Did you think I forgot about you? Our mother and father are calling for you, his voice cracking, his eyes like a shuriken, dark like night, as a sword swung down, blood flow across the walls. Chapter 62, A Dark Dream. Rock Lee. He smiled, despite the constant pain on his head, he smiled. While he didn't know the guy, Shikamaru, very well, he still looked like someone who helped his friends and shinobi of the leaf and didn't stand by and let them die as long as he didn't get a scratch on his skin. That was something Lee always appreciated. To him, that was how a shinobi should always be, good, generous, and humble, saving people who couldn't protect themselves. Seeing the guy, his shadow jutsu stop dozu, made him release a sigh of relief. Otherwise, he might have needed to use the gates to get out of this problem. As he was thinking about getting back to his team, he heard a chuckle. Turning around, everyone saw three shinobi approaching them. At first look, they looked normal, but the IWA emblem made him wary. He knew they had bad blood with the Konoha since the fourth had obliterated over 1,000 of their shinobi within minutes. His sole focus was on the guy of the group. He didn't know why, but he felt a shiver on his body, and his whole body was giving out bad vibes to him. This is very interesting, isn't it? Lee shook his head. He thought perhaps his hearing was more messed up than he had previously thought, but he heard the way his last word came out of his mouth. Glancing at everyone else, he noticed everyone else had noticed his strange tone as well, looking at him again. He saw the two girls behind him who didn't look shocked or bothered by his strange voice. He figured they knew him extremely well. From the corner of his eyes, he saw Sakura lying on the small opening at the bottom of the tree, and her legs were messed up, especially her nose. I should get him away from here, Lee thought. He still didn't know if the IWA team were here to cause problems, but if they were here for that, he needed to get them away from Sasuke and Sakura. They were injured and needed help. Before Lee could utter a word to the IWA team, the guy in front took a step forward. His right eye turned dark like the darkest abyss. Who wants to go first? Lee felt a sudden wave of cold all around him. The air itself felt heavy, almost trying to push him to the ground, weighing down on him. He felt his bones almost popping out from his body. He clenched his teeth tightly, almost breaking them, as the pain spread through his body like a hammer breaking him. He heard the sound of a glass shattering. He looked up to see himself in a familiar place, his breath sticking on his throat, as in front of him stood himself, a much younger version of him. Lee remembered this day better than he wanted to remember it. Why am I so useless? The young Lee cried as he kept trying to do a clone. Lee saw himself still trying to do the hand signs over and over again, but to no avail. Nothing was happening. Lee, for some time, had thought to give up, but his dream to become a shinobi had pushed him to heights he had never seen before. Lee was about to walk forward and confront him when he heard footsteps from behind. He didn't need to turn around when Guy walked past him. The young Lee was lying on the grass hugging his legs when a strange guy kneeled in front of him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Who are you?" Lee asked, turning around, wiping away the tears from his face, putting up a brave face. Guy smiled brightly and helped him stand up. "My name is Guy, how about I help you a bit?" Lee felt happy at the memories. That was the first time meeting Guy-sensei. At the time, he had never thought that he would become his Jonin-sensei. Lee watched as his sensei started showing the young Lee the different stances of taijutsu. The sun was shining down on him, and Lee felt happy when suddenly Guy-sensei turned around and faced him with a face he had only seen once, back at the Kyoni Town mission almost a year ago. His usual happy face turned serious, almost glaring in his direction. Lee didn't want to see this. What could have happened to make him so angry at him? "Why Lee?" Guy-sensei asked with an angry tone, with a hint of desperation in his voice. Lee shuddered at the tone, taking a step back, feeling his breath stuck on his throat. He kept trying to speak, but no words were coming out. "What happened, Guy-sensei?" Lee wanted so desperately to ask, but no words came out, as Guy just shook his head in disappointment at him. "I thought you wanted to protect your friend. You don't think I don't know why you keep training?" Guy asked with a sneer, mocking him before pointing the finger at the river nearby. Lee slowly turned his head to his right, almost afraid to turn it when he saw himself fighting with Niji. The young Lee kept trying to do something, but in the end, Niji bested him like always. "You might lie to everyone. You want to prove to everyone that you can be just as good of a shinobi as someone who can use jutsu." Guy sneered before turning to look Lee directly in the eye. "You're afraid that your lack of chakra will one day result in someone you love to die. You fear that day coming. That's why you keep trying to get stronger, to prove to everyone that you're just as good as everyone else and to avoid that from ever happening." Guy-sensei spoke before a blade pierced his face. "No!" Lee screamed as he rushed towards Guy, who fell dead on the ground, holding him close, as tears streamed down on his cheek. "No, Guy-sensei, wake up!" Lee screamed, moving his shoulder desperately, as in front of him stood a sea of bodies, corpses rotted to the bone. He knew every single one of them: Naruto, Sakura, Sasuke, the red girl with katana, the blonde girl, Shikamaru. Niji was all bones, except the seal on his forehead still shining on his skull, a curse that would never disappear. Tenten, whose whole body was ripped to shreds from blades, a sword piercing her skull, a red smile across her neck, smiling red back at him, almost reaching to her ear. But two corpses who, unlike the others, didn't look decomposed. One was a woman with long dark hair reaching to her feet, the other a guy with a Konoha emblem tightened around his waist. Lee felt that he knew them and should know them, but he couldn't remember where he had seen them. It had been a long time. "You failed us, Lee." Niji's corpse suddenly spoke, his voice almost gone. It felt like a ghost speaking. "You! A shinobi?" Tenten mocked him, with a burst of laughter that sounded terrible, the most terrifying sound he had ever heard. "No, no, no." Lee stood up and glared, his fist bleeding from his nails piercing his skin, his bandages falling off, as he screamed to everyone, not accepting this fate. Lee opened his eyes, almost falling to the ground. His head rose. As his right hand raised, he saw everyone was still there, and the black-eyed guy almost looked surprised to see him. "You're back, how?" The guy spoke. Lee spoke nothing. His eyes found everyone else of his friends was lying unconscious on the ground. "Not everything is how it seems," the girl spoke with a hint of mockery in her voice. Lee rushed at the IWA shinobi with all his speed, kicking his chin sending him crashing against a tree. Lee didn't allow him to rest, as he punched his chest with all his strength, ripping the tree beneath him in two. Lee kept throwing fists and kicks. Another crash, as the guy was lying on the ground. Lee glanced at his teammates but was surprised to see them not looking concerned for his well-being. Lee didn't know if they didn't care or just, there was something else. "Not everything is how it seems," the girl repeated the same words to him, mocking him again. Looking at the IWA shinobi again, he marched towards him, blood coming out of his nose and mouth, broken teeth lying nearby, as Lee grabbed his tunic and put him in front of him. "Now, free my friends," Lee shouted before punching him again. His body crashed against the rock broke in half. Lee knew after all this, all his bones must be broken. He made sure to break his knees and broke his femur, which was the longest bone in the body. He had kicked his back, but making sure not to paralyze him. A peal of laughter reached his ears, his eyes widened, as the IWA guy stood up, his legs completely shattered, bones fractures all over his legs and chest. A bone had pierced his skin and came out around his chest, and yet he stood up. The IWA shinobi smiled, from ear to ear, as the veins around his whole body became more apparent. Lee exhaled when every vein slowly became dark. Lee couldn't understand, was his blood black? You should really watch what you do, IWA guy spoke, but instead of him, now stood Sakura. Lee felt cold as his eyes saw Sakura puke blood, her eyes looking back at him, and they were afraid of him. Why did you do this to me, Lee? She asked with a hurt tone, crying tears of blood. Lee desperately tried to move towards her as she fell dead to the ground. Lee looked around as everything started covering in darkness. Lee put his hands on his ears, his eyes closed, desperately trying to escape this nightmare. Lee, wake up, a voice echoed as everything fell apart like broken glass. Niji, foe. She glared at the Kumo shinobi. She had heard from Narukun that they had once tried to kidnap his mother and Hinata Hyuga, the heiress of Hyuga clan. She knew she should have been more careful. As Fu was covered in a chakra cloak, she rushed at who she assumed was Jitego. He put his hand in front of his chest as she punched him, sending him crashing against a tree. The debris flew everywhere. Burn marks were around his arms, where she had punched him. Fu wanted to attack again when she jumped just in time to dodge an attack from a blonde woman. Fu was flying as her wings came out behind her back. She glanced where Naruto was lying when 3 more Kumo shinobi stood in front of her. Stop this, we don't have to fight, one of them shouted, much to her surprise. If you're here because of the Naruto guy, then you can have him, the guy added as he glanced nervously at Jitego behind him, and the girl who Fu recognized as Nibi Jinchuriki nodded in agreement. Should we just let them go like this? She attacked Jitego. The woman with short blonde hair spoke, looking at her teammates, uncertain of what they should do. Fu was about to jump, grab Naruto, and leave when red lighting came towards her but was blocked by a silver chakra chain. Everyone gasped when they saw Jitego had his right arm covered in red lighting and aiming at Fu, who was protected by who they knew was the Uzumaki girl from Taki. Ashera was standing in the same tree that Naruto was hidden. Her silver chakra chains retreated back to her sleeve as she glared at the Kumo shinobi, who almost hurt Fu. Jitego narrowed his eyes at the newcomer. He knew not to underestimate an Uzumaki. If he started this fight, he knew even if they won, one of them could get badly injured or, worse, die. He knew Yujito might not agree to fight, and the green girl has a bijou and is from Taki. Jitego understood she had the 7 tails beetle, which B-sensei could only defeat, and the way she handled her chakra cloak was enough proof that she could use it. He knew just from the way she controlled the 3 tails meant that she could at the very least use 4 tails, which was not something he was prepared for, not yet. You can have the Uzumaki, but next time we fight, it won't end like this, Jitego spoke loudly. Most of Kumo shinobi looked surprised. In contrast, Fu and Ash looked skeptical. Fu glanced at her friend, wanting to know if she thought this was some ploy, and she just gestured to grab Naruto and leave. Fu nodded and went to Naruto, who was still unconscious. Yujito breathed a sigh of relief before she jumped up at Ashera, who was preparing to leave. Turning around, her face slightly softened. I'm sorry for what happened. I hope to meet again on better terms, Yujito said in an apologist tone. Maybe, Fu said before they jumped away. Yujito saw their figures disappearing before she turned and jumped down, landing 3 meters away from her team. She saw Jitego looking at her. She narrowed her eyes at him, preparing for a fight if it came to that. The others seemed to notice it as well, but Jitego just turned around. We have a tower to reach, we can talk later, he spoke before jumping away. That's it for part 10. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.